Hi, everybody. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, Texas on Monday, May the 19th. And as we like to do on Mondays or once a week, we like to chat today with our good friend Bill Katz, the editor of Urgent Agenda. Lots of big stories on the front page, as they say. So, Bill, welcome. It's always a great honor to have you.
Pleasure to be here, Silvio.
All right, Bill, I'm going to take you back to your days in Brooklyn. Uh, that was crazy. A ship hits the Brooklyn Bridge. I mean, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I've never heard of anything like that. I shouldn't say that because there was a bridge that hit there was a ship that hit a bridge in Baltimore not long ago.
Yes,
But I mean, that must have been strange. There were a bunch of people there who were watching based on these videos I've seen, and they
yes.
must have just been shocked. And then the poor sailors who were up there hanging. It's just the whole thing was bizarre, Bill.
Bizarre and dangerous.
Yes.
This is it's something that rarely happens. I mean, I suppose we've had uh, ships or boats or whatever that you're sailing hitting bridges. There are some ships go out of control. Some are too tall, especially sailing ships for the bridge they're going under. But this is the Brooklyn Bridge, and it's an iconic bridge. And the reason given by the captain of the boat or ship or whatever they prefer to call it was that control was lost when power was lost or something
Hmm.
mechanical went wrong, and you would think that in a situation like that, they would have an alternate control that immediately kicks in and at least allows you to change direction. I don't. I'm not a sailor, and I don't
Yeah.
know anything about that particular vessel. Of course, it was a big sailing ship, and that's not an unusual situation for a vessel used for training new sailors or for midshipmen. They go
Yeah.
right back to the beginning of ships, and they learn how to swab that deck, and they learn how to maintain a vessel, do all the things, learn all the things. But you're quite right. If you look at the tapes, people were just standing there watching that ship,
Hmm.
which is a beautiful ship. And
Yeah.
then all of a sudden, the tops of the uh, 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 masts were just torn off.
Right.
It's very lucky that only two people were killed.
Right.
Obviously, we care for those people, but
Sure.
I mean, this could have been a major catastrophe.
I believe there were several injured.
Yes.
Yeah, and but on the ship only, not people on the ground or on the bridge itself. I don't think it did any harm to the bridge.
No, that bridge is pretty strong. I
Yeah.
mean, it may have
Also, it
scraped some
was
paint off.
it was the mast that hit the ship, so I'm sure that wasn't much of a hit.
Yeah.
But but anyway, I mean, I did see just about an hour or so ago. I saw the photos of the two young sailors, the two young Mexican sailors who were killed. Young sailors, as you would expect in a situation like this. And also, I was listening to the press conference or bits of the press conference yesterday that where somebody from Mexico was saying that this ship apparently goes around the world and it's sort
Yes,
of
it
like a
does.
friendship. They just you know bring Mexican friendship to other countries. Apparently, that's what the ship does.
Yes, it goes way out to sea. I mean, it may be a sailing ship, but it takes these international voyages.
And to think about it, Bill, at one time, that's all the technology you had to travel the oceans.
Yes, and that was ironically because it has engines.
Right.
The uh, we had even back in the sailing ship days, well, the later sailing ship days, we had some sailing ships that did have electric motors of some kind. But it's amazing. You're quite right. Look, at one time, the only way to get from New York to London was by ship.
That's
There,
it.
there was no other way, and and it was considered quite an adventure. And the it was the only uh, better way that came along was the airplane,
Right.
and it kind of made sailing ships and including ocean liners like the Queen Mary, if not obsolete, at least, well, if you wanted to get there first and get there quick, you took the plane.
Right.
But the ocean liner still has its place as a wondrous voyage. Wonderful things done aboard ships today. You can go to plays, you can go to movies, you can engage in sports events that are fit for a ship, and many people will go just for that. For the voyage itself becomes the vacation.
Right. I mean, it's a 6-week trip, as I understand, and that's a modern ship. I mean, ships back then were probably a little bit longer. But what it just amazes me is just how things have changed. I mean, you have people. I mean, a couple of 100 years ago, let's say, you had people literally sitting in that ship or traveling in that ship. Let's say from North America to London or the UK or Europe or whatever. And for 6 weeks, you were completely disconnected from the world.
That's exactly right. Yes.
I mean, you didn't have iPhone, you didn't have internet. All you had was, well, I hope everything is okay when I get back home.
That's it. Well, the radio transmitters that could go from ship to shore, I
Yeah.
think, were only invented in the early 20th century. And
Well,
then, and then
look at the Titanic. I mean, how
yes,
difficult it was to get information out.
yes, it was out by Morse code.
Yeah. And that
Uh,
was 110 years ago, I guess, or something like that.
uh,
But I mean, I just find it fascinating when you look at those ships, how much things have changed, and in not a very long time. I mean, when I'm going to guess that, let's say, well, Thomas Jefferson or James Madison or those presidents were around, which is a couple 100 years ago, they didn't have the motor and the sail ship or anything like that. It was just, you hope you have wind. That's all. You hope that the wind is with you. Otherwise, it's
I've
a
always,
long trip.
I've always wondered about that. What if the wind just stops and stops for days? I mean, I guess they just have to drift with the wind until
Well,
they.
I've seen some not I've seen, but I mean I've read about some things like that where yeah, every once in a while that happens. You just kind of sit out there and hopefully you start rowing a little bit because
Yeah.
they do have these people who can row, but a ship of that size is not going to go real fast when you're rowing.
No.
So I mean that was always from what I understand a sailor's nightmare to find yourself in the middle of the Mediterranean or the Atlantic and there's no wind.
Yeah.
And
That
it
could
did.
that could be embarrassing, especially if you're on a date.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, how are you going to get your date home?
Yes.
Well, mom and dad, we were stuck out
Yeah.
there in the middle of the Mediterranean because there was no wind. Oh, okay. You have a better story than that?
Right. Yes.
All right. Well, quite a tragedy to say the least. And I hope everybody. Well, I guess the only good thing about it is that the number of casualties or the dead is only few, and the casualties are not many.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I got to bring this up very quickly, Bill. It's a very quick story, but today we celebrate the anniversary of when Marilyn Monroe sang "Happy Birthday" to President Kennedy. Do you remember that by any chance?
Oh yes. Oh sure. Oh sure. And she sang it in this very breathless.
Right.
Happy birthday
Yes.
to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Mr. President. And he was sitting there.
Right.
I mean, and I think so was the First Lady, Jacqueline, who must have enjoyed that immensely.
I would think so. And well, anyway, was that on TV? I think it was, right?
I know that that there have been clips of it shown on TV.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was covered live.
Oh, okay. Probably not back then. They didn't have the coverage we do now. But anyway, I always thought that was kind of a funny thing because of the way she sang it.
Oh yes.
You could
Oh,
tell
yes,
she
it
was
was-
having a lot of fun singing it.
Yes, she was. I mean, and she could do that. She had that ability.
Right.
She was a real show person.
But I guess the sign of the times that's 63 years ago. I bet the people planning President Kennedy's reelection in 64 were probably a little concerned with that show.
Well, I don't know. I think it was, it was also playful. There was
Right.
nothing.
Okay. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I get you about it.
Tragically, he didn't live to run the second time.
No, he
Uh,
didn't. He was
yeah.
killed about a year later. Yeah, that's
Yes.
right.
There was
That's
another
right.
incident like that, by the way.
Really?
When CBS decided to drop Judy Garland's television show, she was such a big star, but she just wasn't getting the ratings for some
Mm,
reason, and they decided to take it off the air. Well, Judy Garland was about as big a star as you could get. She was
yeah.
an icon, and they said we can't just call her on the phone or send her a message. Why don't you invite her up to the highest ranking uh, office of CBS, and we'll tell her personally, and and
Oh,
they did, and she came, and I think she knew what it was about, but she was very gracious, and she and say said and they told her that we can no longer sustain the show, and we thank you very much for etc. 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 And she said, hmm. So I won't be doing it anymore. That's right, Miss Garland. But we wanted to tell you personally because of our regard for you and everything like that. And she said, "May I use your telephone?" And I said, "Of course, of course." And she dialed a number, and she said, "This is Judy Garland. Is my good friend in?" Or something like that. And somebody obviously said yes. And she got on. She continued and said, "Hello, Jack." And he said, "Yes." "Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, President Kennedy. Happy birthday to you." And she hung up the phone and left.
Ooh, that is a great story. I was not
Yes.
familiar with that one. Um, that is great. I had no idea about that
Yeah.
story, Bill. I learn something from you every week. That's a great story. Well, before we get to President Biden and everything that's going on, just a quick update on some things. President Trump apparently had a conversation, as I understand, with Mr. Putin today, and
Yes.
they apparently have decided to keep talking. And Pope Cleo, I keep saying Pope John Paul, but Pope Cleo the 14th is going to be, I guess, engaged in this. That's a good thing. I'm glad to hear
Yeah.
that. I'm not
Okay.
sure if it's the Russia Ukraine talks. Yeah,
Yes.
I'm
Well,
glad to hear that. Well, I'm glad to
they
hear that.
yes. Well, they're going to keep talking, but one of the things that you learn in studying diplomacy is to find out exactly how your opponent negotiates, and then you can understand what he or she is saying. For example, in the case of Iran, and this is a warning that has been given to our government, Iran doesn't want money out of these negotiations with the United States. What it wants is time. The Persians are very sensitive to the value of time in negotiation and what can be done with it.
Mm,
And I suspect that the Russians are on to that, and we are on to it to a certain degree. But I'm very concerned, and I think most people should be, that these talks never seem to come to an end, and nothing is usually achieved.
hmm
But we have lost time in the process. And in some circumstances, for example, in our negotiations with Iran, the time is precious because thanks to the Israelis, we took out and the United States, we took out the Iranian air defense system.
hmm
It was an Israeli operation. The United States helped with it, and they have today no air defense. They just cannot. They could just go right in,
Wow.
and people who have been on television and are Iran experts have warned that what they're negotiating for right now is time. They
Right.
just want to keep it going so their crews can fix the air defense system, and we be back where we started from.
Well, hopefully President Trump knows that. I assume he
Yeah,
does.
yeah,
And there is a certain timetable that he has in mind. But it's a dangerous conversation because I think a military operation in Iran, we always think that these things are easy, but they never
no,
are,
they never are.
especially when the United States is involved. So hopefully you're right. Hopefully they're aware of this because I agree with you 100% that Iran is buying time. Now, in the case of Ukraine and Russia, I don't really know what to make of it. I mean, I support Ukraine's. I mean, in the sense that I think what Russia did was terrible. But I
Yeah.
also realize that Ukraine doesn't have there's no military victory here for Ukraine. There's no military solution because they cannot win this war by themselves because Russia is 5 times bigger and they'll kill 5 times more people. And now we are learning, Bill, this is interesting, that it isn't just North Koreans who are apparently helping Putin out.
Hmm.
Cubans, there's 2,000 Cuban
Yes,
soldiers.
yes, and they must really enjoy it over
Oh,
there.
I bet they're having the time of their lives.
Yeah, fighting in the mud. Those who are going to
Right.
come back.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, yes, the Russians are drawing on all of their allies and almost allies to supply troops, and this could be a very long list. There are countries around the world that are sympathetic to Russia, and I would not be surprised if Chinese troops were sent. I would not be surprised if troops from some Asian countries that are sympathetic historically to Russia, and we could have quite a show over there, and a very dangerous one.
Well, yes, and also, but it's also a sign that he may not be able to recruit home troops. I mean, Russians.
Yes,
There may be a sign here too that he's not that he's running out of soldiers, but that he doesn't necessarily want to push the Russians anymore because they've taken some heavy losses. I don't know,
correct.
I don't know where to go to find out who's lost what, but everything I hear is that the Russians have taken heavy losses.
Yes, they have taken heavy losses. When this war began, and they began it, they thought it would be over in a few days.
Right,
But
right.
the resilience of the excuse me, of the Ukrainians was tremendous. And yes, Russia has lost thousands and thousands of men. I don't know if a real figure is available, and I'm sure that what Putin has in mind is that the Russian people won't take this very much longer, and that some elements of the Russian army could turn on him. And it's amazing to me that he's still alive. It really is.
Well, I don't think he goes shopping a lot.
No, no, not at all.
No, I
And
that he lives probably in a very small world where I mean, they have a lot of control as to where he goes. And when he goes swimming, I bet they have one of those bubble roofs
oh, I'm
with a
sure.
swimming pool. And I bet he doesn't take a lot of planes either.
No, and I'm sure he doesn't go out to too many soccer matches.
No,
Yeah, but
no,
it is amazing that he's still there,
it is.
because anyone in the old Soviet Union who had a record like this would suddenly find himself facing a firing squad, and it was done rather often.
Yeah,
So
or at least if not a firing squad, early retirement,
early
like
retirement.
what happened with Nikita Khrushchev. All of a sudden he disappeared.
Yes, yeah, and yes, some rather famous ones did, but I don't know how much longer this can go on either side,
Hmm.
because I suspect if the Russians do not show themselves to be ready to make some kind of a deal that would help out the Ukrainians and let them live, I think the Ukrainians may take matters into their own hands and start firing heavier missiles into Russia, and firing heavy missiles and artillery into Crimea, and then you could have a conflict that could just blow up.
That's right. That's right. No, it can be very ugly. I hope that this latest contact proves helpful now that Pope Leo the 14th is apparently going to get involved. And Zelensky was at the Pope's mass, and I understand they met one on one. But Zelensky himself could not be exactly very happy with things. I'm sure they're out to get him too. I mean, I don't think. I
Sure, of
mean,
course.
these are two guys, Putin and Zelensky, who probably wouldn't mind spending the rest of their lives in another place.
I think that's absolutely true, because Zelensky is, he's a great hero to many in the West because of the way he
Right.
has
Sure.
led Ukraine in its defense. But within Ukraine itself, there are many people who probably think, you weren't ready for this. The country wasn't ready for this. You can't end the war. What good are you?
Right. No, I know. It's very bad. It's very bad. Okay, well, let's get to the topic of the day, which is President Biden. Now, let me just say up front that I say a prayer for President Biden. I
Sure.
hope he recovers. It's terrible news from what I hear. I mean, friends of mine who've had that cancer, it's not a, it's not fun. Even if they survive, it's a difficult survival. I mean, the test you got to go through. Cancer is very bad, as I'm sure you know, Bill. So I have
Yes.
a prayer here for President Biden, and but I cannot help but be suspicious, Bill, as to why we're finding this out now. How is it possible? Because I'm hearing from doctors who are saying, and again, this is not my medical opinion. I'm just repeating what I'm hearing from doctors that stuff like this just doesn't, you just don't go to the doctor one day and he says, well, you have a fifth degree uh, prostate cancer. Now, it could happen if you never went to the doctor.
Yeah.
I mean, for example, there are people. I mean, I've had friends who over the years who went to the doctor and the doctor said, "Well, I hate to break the news to you, but you're not really as well as you thought you were."
Yeah.
I mean, and I know a
Oh,
family
that's
member.
true. Oh, that's true.
I know a family member who went to the doctor and the doctor said, "I'm sorry to tell you this, but you've got like 6 months to live. You have horrible cancer inside of you."
Mm.
So,
Mm.
but why? Because this person never took care of themselves, never went to a doctor, never had physicals,
Yes.
and all of a sudden this happened. So, but that's unlikely when you're the president of the United States, Bill. That's what puzzles me here.
Well, yes, and so there was some commentary on whether he's getting the best medical care. I can't judge that. We can't judge that here. But the White House has its own medical staff, and of course, the president has access immediately to Bethesda Naval Hospital and their fine staff. Uh, who knows? Who knows? I know that you can go for a long time with certain diseases that can go undetected, even if you go to a doctor regularly. There are some that are very, very difficult to detect, and and then the person suddenly drops dead, and nobody knows what was wrong with them. I'm not hearing you.
I'm saying that I've
There you
heard
go.
about that happening to people, and I'm not a doctor. I have no way of saying anything other than what makes all of this so hard to believe or difficult to believe is the entire package.
Yes.
And that's where it's very, very troubling. And that's why I think a lot of people are worried that maybe they were holding this back. Look, I hope not. I hope not, because that would look real bad on the first lady, Bill.
Certainly. Well, she was really the person who was pushing him and pushing him and pushing him, and I don't know what how she handled his medical care, if she handled it at all. Maybe she just assumed the White House medical office handled it.
And that could be. That could be.
Yeah.
Maybe she just assumed that Joe was getting his medical tests. You know,
Right.
the White House has a doctor who travels with the president everywhere. Maybe she assumed that he was getting his blood samples. All I can tell you is in my own personal story, after 50, the doctor says, we got to check your prostate. And
Yeah.
every time I go in for my annual physical, that's all he talks about. Hey, you got to remember that because it happens to men.
That's
Uh,
right.
and so I would have to believe that the doctors at the White House, would be aware of that. I have to believe that they are. But whether this was hidden from the American people not or not, Bill, I'm not going to say that I know one way or the other. But I do think the entire episode of his condition was hidden. A lot of things were hidden, and that's why I think there's so much anger and so much concern for or deception, if you will. I mean, I think a lot of people feel like, hey, we were not told the truth about his condition to begin with, so maybe it's possible they could have been hiding this one as well.
Well,
I don't know.
our thoughts go back to President Roosevelt, who in those days the press did not report the president's medical condition to the public. It was considered a private information and
Right.
not public information. And yet, people looking at Roosevelt in 1945, uh, including his cardiologist, knew he was going to die just by looking at him. I
Right.
mean, he looked horrible. He looked like a man who was fading away, but it was never reported to the press. And any reporter who might break that rule, that understanding, would probably be out of a job.
Yeah. No, I know, and there's always the story of President Wilson and Mrs.
Oh, yes.
Wilson and all of that as well. But in all fairness, that was a different time. I guess you might explain it that way. That was a different time. I don't think a lot of Americans had the same opportunities to see President Wilson and President Roosevelt as we see a modern president. I mean, there's always almost like a daily information about the modern
Yes.
president. You see him going in and out of helicopters or whatever all the time. So it's
Yes.
a little
And even, you could, even in the early days of television, if it was only a question of the president walking to and from his airplane, you could still see him. I
right.
mean, it may have been from a distance, but it was considered a news story in that situation. And look, going back to that era again, and another incident, and that is that when President Kennedy and Richard Nixon had their first debate, it was pointed out that Kennedy looked very, very weak. He was underweight. He was sick, and some people noticed it. However, in those days, television screens were pretty small, and they were not as clear as they are today. So I suppose that you went on and you hoped to look your best.
Yeah.
Most of the comments on a president's health in those days would come from people who saw him
Right.
every day, or people who saw him, going between buildings. And the president sometimes would travel around in the big car, and he would wave from the big car. And I saw that actually in Washington one day. We were working with a friend, and the president and his party pulled up. It was a play that they were going to about the presidency, and I happened to be walking with a woman who knew Kennedy.
Mm.
And she said, "Oh, there's the president's car. Come, let's say hello." And then she went a while, and she stopped and said, "Wait a minute. I don't like the look on his face.
Mm.
Maybe he had an argument with Jackie. Let's not disturb him." And we didn't. But she immediately saw how horrible he looked. And what it was this was the evening before the announcement of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and he knew
Right.
what was going on, and it was reflected in his face.
Well, I understand a story, and maybe you remember this, I'm sure better than me, that he was flown back to Washington, D.C., and the press were told that he wasn't feeling well. I remember reading something about that when he was in Chicago, and then he was flown back. I mean, I'm not saying this is the same story that you're relating,
No.
but something along the lines that when he got the news or something that the Pierre, what was the name of the press secretary?
Salinger, Pierre
Right,
Salinger.
Pierre Salinger explained to the media that the president was going back because he wasn't feeling well or something. And I remember reading something about that he wasn't feeling well. And I remember seeing a picture or a photo of President Kennedy in a car that night, and he did look shaken. I don't know whether he was sick, but he looked like a man who had just gotten some very bad news.
Well, either that or he could be sick. He was in constant pain
Right,
from his
that's true
World
too.
War II, and I suppose there were times when the pain erupted.
Right. Yeah, there were times like that too. You're exactly right. That could have been the case. But times are different now because there's so much coverage of these men now.
Yes.
I mean, look at President Trump. I mean, I think he may be saturated sometimes because he's everywhere, and I think they're going to have to cut back a little bit on that. But nevertheless, he's everywhere. He's answering every question. So God forbid something were to happen to him, it would be like on live TV, Bill, because he's always on live TV.
That's right. Well, if something happened, absolutely, and then you would have a real life event covered on television, and with the with the quality of electronics and home television today, it would be very brought to you in living color, very sharp picture. We can see every thread on his outfit. And look, presidents get caught in situations. I think I once told you the story about the 1960 election. I was an intern for a U.S. senator, and we were invited out to Glenview to watch the first debate
Right.
between Kennedy and Nixon. And we were told that the president, although he was Senator Kennedy then, promised to come out to our group after the debate and say hello. And we had the debate where most of us thought he won by a little bit. And we were told by the chairman, please wait, because we've just gotten word that the president is in the police car and he is indeed coming out here. And I was sitting at a table with a bunch of firemen and, real city guys. And Kennedy walked into the room and his hands were shaking.
Wow.
And this fireman said to me, he wants to be president. Would you? And his hands were shaking badly, probably from the nerves of the debate. I mean, he was just, what a night for him. And he came in and the usual pattern was he would say hello to the group and then read off the names of people he was endorsing, none of whom he'd ever met.
Right.
But I would like to endorse for county executive, an old friend. What's his name here? And he was doing that, and he got every name wrong. He just was stuttering and making really he looked foolish, but he finally got through it, and he left and won the election. But there are many people who see a president or a would-be president in a situation like that, and these days it gets around.
Right. No, exactly. Well, one last point that I wanted to mention about all of this, I think there's two big losers here, the Democrats, in the sense that they protected Biden, but most of them represent safe districts. So I don't think that's any of them are going to pay a political price. I just don't think that that's going to happen. But the media doesn't have that luxury. And I do think the media has to take a close look at itself, because this was not a good chapter for them, Bill. This whole thing starting with the Russia thing. Remember, my gosh.
Oh, yeah, the Russian collusion hoax.
Yeah, I mean, that was 8 years ago. That was all Russia back then. Then we went to the laptop. Then we went to the 51 famous people who signed that letter. And then, I mean, it just was not I don't know what it is. It's not been a good time for them. And they don't have as much time to recover. They have I don't know how you recover your reputation after people think you lied to them, especially as a reporter. I mean,
well, it sometimes is difficult because reporters don't like to be lied to for obvious reasons. I mean, they are doing a story, and they don't like to be caught giving the speaker an unfair advantage by not detecting or not calling him on what he might have thought was a lie or an act of deception. But lying in Washington is common. It's a city of lies. Just as like Paris is the city of light, and Washington is the city of lies.
Yeah.
And who was it? It was President Truman. It said, in Washington, if you want a friend, get a Cocker Spaniel. Very little loyalty, lots of knives in the back, and I think we'll have to live with that. But this was a particularly fascinating case because of all the talk over the years of the lies that were told about Donald Trump by the Democratic Party.
Right. Well, I just think that they're going to have a very difficult time recovering. And if you look at the ratings, they're not doing well. Some of the places that focused on just being obsessed with Trump, they're not doing well. I mean, I just saw the ratings for CNN last week, and they were
God, awful.
I mean, they were awful. I'm just saying, how much longer? I mean, how much longer can you sell advertising with rates like that? I suppose you can, but you had to set, you got to drop your rate card a lot.
I think the CNN that we see here is subsidized by the larger organization. CNN is a worldwide
That's
organization.
True. No, that's true.
And so they may be subsidized, but just the embarrassment of going on the air and then getting a rating that you got 400,000 people watching, whereas ABC had 7 million, and I think it's more the humiliation and the embarrassment than anything else that gets to them.
Well, it's gotta affect the people reading or people having these programs, because you're sitting there, you think you're putting out a good effort, and then, like you said, Fox News gets 3 million, 4 million, and they're getting 400,000.
Yeah.
And you ask yourself, I mean, is Fox News that much better? Well, in some cases, yes. In some cases, no. I'm not saying that they're perfect either, but at
No.
least their audience. I mean, I'll tell you this. I don't watch Fox News every night because, frankly, a lot of times I'd rather just watch the clips of some of the shows I like. But in Fox News, at least I get a sense that they're more serious about things. Over at CNN, and maybe they've changed, okay? But for a while there, it seemed like every show was about how bad Trump was.
Oh, it's the same way.
It
It's
is?
the, I think there's been some improvement, and I think that some of their older people, more mature journalists, try to keep it at least fairly straight, if not completely straight. But I stopped going over. I used to go watch Fox, and I'd say, well, let's see what they're talking about on CNN, and it was just this endless wrapping of Donald Trump, no matter what the subject was. It could be chocolate ice cream. And they would say, I think he's ruined all the chocolate ice cream in
Right.
America. And most children think that as well. In fact, we have a poll here of children. And that's what it is. And there's a kind of sneering quality
Right.
when they cover Trump that is inappropriate. Their job is to report the news without fear or favor.
Right.
And instead, they're giving us a slanted version and yet claiming that they're reporting the news without fear or favor and are shocked that anybody would suggest otherwise.
Right. Well, Bill, I think they have a poll of 7,000 6-year-olds
Yeah, yes.
who are promising to be likely voters someday, who are saying that they're going to be so impacted by the Trump presidency that they're just going to check out of society or something like that and never vote again because they've been so checked out by
Yes.
the Trump president. But I mean, some of the stuff well, anyway, it's not helping them. I'll just put it that way. It's not helping them business wise. And then I think the one that I believe is maybe the worst, maybe you would disagree with me, Bill, but this magazine Atlantic.
Yes.
I mean, the editor of that magazine, some of the stuff that he's printed.
Oh yes, they have some very good people there too, but
Sure.
they have allowed the magazine to become just so slanted and twisted and sneering that it has lowered the level of respect for the magazine.
But I remember, maybe you can help me because you may remember this better. But I remember a time when Atlantic magazine was kind of like a serious liberal
Oh yeah,
magazine.
oh very, and respected.
Yes, because if you remember when Vice President Quayle made those comments about that program on TV about the single mother, whatever it was,
Oh
Murphy
yes,
Brown, I think,
that's right. And
that they
he
actually ran a story a few months later saying Vice President Quayle is right. That was the headline. Vice-
that's right. The issue was whether or not television networks should have discussions and treat what they called at that time an illegitimate child as just if it was another child, and there was nothing wrong with
right.
what the parents did, and he called them out on it, and he said this is teaching kids a very bad lesson, and the week right after that, the program uh, which was I think an hour program, began with all the cast members looking grimly into the television camera and saying the vice president of the United States is doing a great disservice to American children
Right.
by suggesting that those born out of wedlock should be treated somewhat differently than others. And we just want to say that we are united, all members of the cast who agree on everything, are united in our contempt for what the vice president said. And the vice president was ridiculed. He was laughed at in some circles, put down in some circles, because people were taking the side of the cast of the show. Well, as you said later, it was pointed out that that there was a problem involving
Right.
a situation like that, and it turned out to be very, very embarrassing for the show.
Well, also, I think the other point that Vice President Quayle was making was the absence of fathers.
Yes.
The absence of fathers, that somehow that show did not, consider the impact of growing up without a father. I think that was the other point that the vice president was making. But getting back to my original point, it was a serious magazine.
Sure.
It's not the kind of magazine where they would run a story based on what somebody heard, somebody else say, and somebody else say that President Trump had made some remarks about soldiers in Paris or something, which I thought was horrible for them to run a story like that without any sources. It was just, well, John told Mary, who told Jane, I mean, come on, that's not journalism. But that's how they do. That's how they do it. Well, Bill, I want to thank you again for your time, and thank you again for telling me the Judy Garland story, which I was not aware of that. And thank you for the input on other topics, as you always have. And thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have a great week.
I hope you have a great week too, Silvio, and I have a feeling we're going to have a lot to talk about next week.
I think so. I think something about a certain former president might be foremost in our minds.
Yeah. Okay.
Unfortunately. All right, Bill, thank you so much, and enjoy your day.
My pleasure. Same.
Okay. Our good friend, Bill Katz, the editor of Urgent Agenda. We always do this once a week. We talk about the issues, and today I learned a story, which I was not familiar with, the Judy Garland story. That one I did not know. I knew about the Marilyn Monroe. Well, I knew because I had read about it and had seen the video clip. But anyway, I was glad to see that Bill brought me back, introduced me to the Judy Garland story. Of course, Judy Garland, quite an actress herself. Thank you for listening. This is Silvio Canto in Dallas, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye, everybody.